Hello, everybody. My name is Howard, and I am with the White House Office of Public Engagement. Thank you for joining us today for the White House and White House Initiative on AA and NHPI's briefing on the 2022 Tonga eruption and tsunami. As a note, this is a White House and administration priority and an issue important to the president. And we are joined today by a panel of experts from the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Department of State, who will update you all as the United States continue to increase its assistance to the Kingdom of Tonga in the wake of the volcanic eruptions, ashfall, and tsunami. So for housekeeping, if there are any press inquiries after the briefing, please reach out to me directly. My email is attached to the Zoom webinar registration. But first up, we have Crystal Kai, Director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, who we love to partner on these OPE and WHIAANHPI briefings. So with that, Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Howard, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. 2 weeks ago, an underwater volcano erupted near the island nation of Tonga and led to a tsunami impacting the Kingdom of Tonga and sending tsunami warnings across the Pacific as far away as the US West Coast. We know that this natural disaster caused widespread damage, and we know that community leaders have been very eager to get more updates on what the US federal government is doing to support ongoing recovery efforts in Tonga. We know that, really starting that weekend, we started to hear from so many of you leaders here in our United States, in the Tongan American and the broader Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community who were worried about friends and family unable to get a hold of them due to the fact that the eruption and tsunami actually damaged Tonga's submarine communication cable and limited international and domestic communication. So we know that it's been a very big desire to get more updates on the work that has been done and is continuing in terms of our ongoing relief and recovery efforts for Tonga. And we really are so honored to have a really incredible lineup of speakers here with us today. So I know that we really want to leave time for our expert panelists who are joining us from the State Department, from USAID, from the National Security Council and others. So thank you to all of our speakers for joining us. And as Howard mentioned, please, if there are, for the press that are on the line, if there are any inquiries, please submit that to Howard throughout the course of this briefing. So thank you again, and I will now turn it back over to Howard O.
Thank you, Crystal. And up next, we have Erica Mortsugu, Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior AA and HPI Liaison based in the Chief of Staff's office. Erica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Aloha, y'all. Malawalele. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My thoughts and prayers are with all of the individuals, families, and communities whose lives have been upended by this natural disaster. Now, I want to reserve the bulk of this time for my colleagues at USAID and State who have important updates about their response efforts, but I wanted to emphasize how important this issue is to the White House. We are closely tracking the ongoing developments and the situation across the islands and are coordinating closely with our colleagues across the administration and across the White House to respond accordingly. Thank you for the opportunity to share this space with you, and please stay safe and take care of yourselves. Howard, back to you.
Thank you, Erica. And so up next, we have our distinguished briefers. First up, we have Thayer Ruggles, Director of the Australia, New Zealand, and Pacific Office at the U.S. Department of State. Thayer?
Thank you, Howard, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about the administration's response to the really just horrific volcanic eruption and subsequent tsunami that impacted not just Tonga, but many peoples throughout the Pacific Basin. As Howard said, my name is Thayer Ruggles. I lead the State Department's office that's responsible for our relations with Tonga and the entire Pacific. I thought I would just level set a little bit on what happened and the broad diplomatic response, and then turn to my colleagues, experts at USAID, who can speak in greater detail about the humanitarian response. I think you're all quite familiar with the volcanic eruption itself that first took place on January 14th, a subsequent stronger eruption on the 15th that caused ashfall throughout the Tongan Islands and generated tsunami waves as high as 49 feet that reached some areas of Tonga, including in Nuku'alofa, also completely submerging some of the smaller outer islands. Sadly, 3 people did die as a result of the tsunami, 2 Tongans and 1 citizen of the United Kingdom. From what we have been able to assess, approximately 84% of the Tongan population of 100,000 people has been affected by this tsunami. Public infrastructure, hundreds of homes damaged or destroyed. As was mentioned as well, the eruption damaged both local and international undersea cables, leaving Tonga without communication and internet access. And certainly that was one of the challenges we grappled with in the early hours and days following the eruption. Ashfall that covered Tonga's most populated islands, of course, threatens the air people breathe, the water that they drink. It increases risks of waterborne disease, impacts people's livelihoods, especially farmers, fisherfolk, and livestock rearing communities. As we follow up on the damage that was caused, we're working with our partners on the ground, looking at the telecommunications damage and needs there. Also, long-term food security and accessibility to potable water is a key priority going forward for some 50,000 people. I think one of the other aspects that has impacted our response is the fact that Tonga, like many countries in the Pacific, is COVID-free. And in organizing a response, we and other partners wanted to make sure that we respected Tonga's no contact policy in terms of not having personnel who from outside Tonga interact with Tongolese to protect them from COVID-19. We've been doing that, and our partners have been doing that quite successfully. And again, USAID perhaps can talk more to that if you're interested. You know, the United States doesn't have an embassy in Tonga. We have an embassy in Suva in Fiji, not too far away, that is responsible for our relations there. Right after the eruption and the tsunami, on the 16th of January, our embassy issued a disaster declaration. And what that did was it freed up an initial $100,000 from USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance to support the emergency response activities through Tonga's Red Cross Society and the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Again, my colleagues from USAID will speak to that and the subsequent assistance that they've brought to bear. But that is a kind of a standard initial response to make sure that the systems are operating and our international partners are able to mobilize immediately. From an American Citizen Services perspective, the embassy started receiving inquiries about US citizens in Tonga that same day, January 16th, from concerned friends and family members. And I just want to stress there's no higher priority for us at the State Department than the welfare of Americans overseas. And so the embassy leveraged its contacts and the communications that it was able to achieve, which at first was quite difficult, but we have some volunteers in Tonga that assist us with these sorts of things to help conduct those welfare checks. So far, the State Department has confirmed the safety of 95 individuals from 39 different inquiries we received. The embassy has not been able to resolve 5 outstanding inquiries, but that's where the stateside family members were unable to provide a local Tongan telephone number or address. So we are not aware of any US citizen injuries or deaths. And of course, if anyone has any concerns or any follow-up, there's an email address that the embassy has, suvaacs@state.gov. That's suvaacs@state.gov. If you have any welfare inquiries you want to pass on. I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions later on, but I'd like to pass the microphone back and over to USAID. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. Up next, we have Aaron Nicholson, Director of the Office of East Asia and Pacific Affairs at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Aaron, the floor is yours. Aaron, you might be muted on accident.
I apologize. Thank you, Howard and Taylor. First, our condolences for the loss of life, injuries, and damage suffered from this natural disaster. But I am pleased here to be with my colleagues to tell you how the United States government, through the U.S. Agency for International Development, is responding. Before handing the floor to Robert Thayer from USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, I'd like to mention how USAID is engaging in the region. First, we greatly value our historic ties, strong economic links, and mutual cooperation toward a brighter future. USAID partners with 12 Pacific Island nations, including Tonga, to advance a more democratic, prosperous, and resilient Pacific Island region. For the past couple of years, we've placed several new staff across 6 locations, including Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau, and more than quadrupled our assistance over the past 3 years to help make meaningful and sustainable development gains. Our USAID point of contact for Tonga is based in Suva, Fiji. Second, our programming in the region is focused on adapting to climate change and improving disaster preparation. You'll hear more from Robert about why this work is so significant when a disaster strikes. With some Pacific Island nations only 15 feet above sea level, this part of the world is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. USAID is partnering with countries across the Pacific to improve the sustainable use of natural resources, protect the vulnerable communities that depend on them for livelihoods, and strengthen their climate resiliency. We're also supporting sustainable projects like infrastructure, to name one example, to safeguard communities in the environment while improving connectivity across the region, which will impact the rest of the world. Lastly, I want to emphasize that we don't do this work alone. We collaborate with local governments, local organizations, including faith-based organizations, other US government agencies, including our military in special cases, as well as other development partners, such as Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan. And our response for the volcanic eruption in Tonga is no different when we've closely coordinated with Australia, New Zealand, France, and others. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Perfect segue. And up next, we have Rob Thayer, Division Chief for East Asia and Pacific, USAID Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Rob?
Thank you, Howard, and thank you, Aaron and colleagues. Thanks so much to the White House for hosting and to every one of you attending. I know so many of you have family and friends who have been directly affected. Perhaps there's even some of you maybe on the line from Tonga, telecommunications permitting. I don't know, but U.S. government through USAID and our Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance provides assistance all over the world based on assessed need, and Tonga is no exception. I think you're all well aware of the impacts of the tsunami and volcano, and the impacts were summarized well, by the way, in the invitation that went out from the White House and in a fact sheet that went out from USAID on Wednesday, and in multiple news reports, so I won't rehash the details. We always like to remind people that the most important assistance that we provide for natural disasters and sudden onset events is the assistance we provide before the event occurs. And in Tonga, we did have pre-existing partnerships with non-governmental organizations working in coordination with NEMO, the National Emergency Management Office, which helped enable initial assistance to be mobilized immediately after the event. In this region, Taylor, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but in case not, I should mention we work very closely with other donor nations, particularly in this region, the French the Australians and the New Zealanders who are playing a lead role among donors in coordinating with the government of Tonga. And as you may be aware, in addition to the pre-existing preparedness partnerships, the US government, Taylor mentioned the 100,000, which was initially provided. And you may be aware that we've announced an additional 2.5 million in USAID emergency funding is made available to support relief and recovery efforts. And I now want to turn to my colleague, Tiare Eastman, who is our regional advisor based in Honolulu. She's there coordinating our assistance and can speak to some of the details. And I think we're all available for questions afterward if there are any. Thank you very much. Tiare, over to you.
Thanks so much, Rob. I just wanted to give an update on the situation on the ground as we understand it. So while the outside world waited and worried and we couldn't get information from Tonga out, the Tongans, under the leadership of the government of Tonga's National Emergency Management Office, NEMO, and relief organizations on the ground in Tonga were already focusing on the immediate life-saving actions, such as evacuation of several outer islands in the WHIAANHPI group to safer locations, cleaning up the ashfall. Their first effort was to clear the runway of about 10 to 15 centimeters of ash, a very difficult job, and provision of safe drinking water. This has been their focus for the past 2 weeks. The international community has delivered significant quantities of relief items from the government of Tonga's initial request, and NEMO is now working to receive these supplies and distribute them. Tonga has instated a 72-hour quarantine of all incoming cargo and a 21-day quarantine for any incoming people. Tonga has not approved the entry of relief teams from the outside due to concerns about introducing COVID-19 into Tonga. In addition, the total communication blackout that occurred in the days following the eruption tsunami have challenged the external partners to support Tonga remotely in their relief efforts. So establishing more satellite communication with Tonga is a priority for the next few weeks, until it's known how long the repairs to the undersea cable will take. The immediate priorities in Tonga are now cleaning up the ashfall, continuing to repair and clean water tanks so that they are ready for when the rains arrive to collect safe drinking water. Very little rainfall has arrived in Tonga to date. The first rainfalls were reported in the last few days. Though that rain actually had some additional impact on changing the composition of the ash. But we expect to hear the results from the government of Tonga's initial damage assessment. So Rob mentioned we provide assistance based on needs. So we're really looking to understand what are the priority needs identified in that damage assessment and the government's response plan. We anticipate the humanitarian needs resulting from the dual impacts of the eruption and the tsunami to persist in Tonga for months, if not years. So this is an ongoing active volcano that could have additional eruptions, additional earthquakes. So this is an active and live situation. In terms of summarizing our USAID response, what our focus will be, there's three main ways that we're responding. The first is to support Tonga to reestablish their early warning system that was damaged in the tsunami and to establish some volcano monitoring capability. Our second line of effort is to support local relief organizations on the ground. There are many. We were working with them, as Rob mentioned previously, on preparedness activities. Support those local experts to continue their efforts to clean up the ash, reestablish water supply, provide basic needs for those evacuated from unsafe outer islands, and to begin looking forward, to begin improving that food security through replanting crops and reestablishing the agriculture and the fishing sectors. Our third line of effort is to support the Pacific Regional United Nations agencies to provide support to Tonga with supplies and equipment or other technical support, which includes a provision of satellite communication devices. And all that effort is based out of Suva with also UN staff there locally in Tonga. That's all I have. Over to you, Howard.
Thank you all to all the briefers. And now we have some time for some Q&A. If all of the experts would turn on your cameras. And then for all the attendees, if you have a question, if you could please use the raise your hand function, and I will start to call on some of you. Definitely. Any questions that are not answered, please feel free to email me. We will source them out to USAID as well as state for processing. Okay, next up, we have Susie. Susie, granting you access to ask your question. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, Susie Felch, Malohi Fo'o with Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resources, known as PICTAR in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I'm going to say thank you so much for the help. I was born in Tonga, and so I'm going to say I'm a Tongan expert in what my community needs, and I appreciate your expertise in what you do. But I also want to say that last night we had our support group online, and we had some of the parliament on the call last night that are based in New Zealand. We are collecting money ourselves, not outwardly, but the issues for United States is that we can't do crisis work from this place. Like, it takes us 30 days to get shipping there, right? And with the flights not going in, that is just not feasible for us. However, we're looking at what needs to happen, working with the community-based organizations that are based in Tongatapu, and the senior citizens, some of the lowest income villages that are there. What I'm hearing from the ground there is that they're hoarding water, that the water is not getting out to, I've talked to the Red Cross here, I've talked to the LDS Church, Humanitarians, and making sure, linking them up with the community-based organizations on the ground in Tongatapu to make sure that, the Queen Mother has a residential home. I will use for transferability understanding that she's taken in all of the children that are disabled, that don't have services. That is another area we would like to support, along with the LGBTQ community on the ground there, the Tonga Letis Association, working with them that have taken on the senior citizens. So with all of this said, in what we're trying to do here in Utah is there is fraud going on here in the United States of people taking money for aid, right? And I don't know how we stop that, but I want to just call that out, is that I had a reporter reach out to me yesterday that said that they knew of 2 or 3 fraudulent organizations that were taking money on behalf of Tongans and getting it to, that's probably never gonna reach there, right? And so that to me is an issue. I wanna say that please engage the Tongan community-based organizations here in the United States. We really are the true experts of our own culture, our own community, and we have those connections that are culturally relevant. Let us use our cultural norms to help you do what you do. So thank you so much. Open for comments.
Susie, thank you for your question. If you would follow up with me afterwards as well, let's connect Tonga American groups here to state and USAID, which I'm sure they're also in contact with, but please follow up with me afterwards. And I will yield to the panelists to answer your question.
Tiara, you might want to say something. The only thing I'd point out, thank you for all that information. I can't really speak to the details, that you're raising, but I would point out that the USAID fact sheet, it's called a response summary that went out publicly on Wednesday, does have a link to a partner organization of ours that provides guidance on donations and on coordination of assistance. And included in there are, I believe, Terry, tell me if I'm wrong, but there are a list of organizations which we know to be credible organizations that you can work with, in a trustworthy manner. So I would recommend you look at that response summary and see if you find anything satisfactory there. And Howard, if there are additional questions, again, we're happy to take those afterward offline. Thank you.
Rob, could I just pick up on Susie's question? I think the points raised about culturally appropriate aid delivery, absolutely crucial and at the forefront of our mind. That's why we have existing partnerships with local organizations. So these are Tongans in their community working to identify the most vulnerable with an emphasis on disabled persons as well as elderly. We want to make sure that nobody is left behind in this response. And we have the partners that have that expertise and have that deep reach into the communities in place, ready to ensure that the most vulnerable have access to the emergency assistance as well. So I just wanted to highlight that's a crucial part of this and something that is forefront in our minds as well. Over.
Thank you. And I see that Jim Thompson, White House National Security Council, Director of Partnerships, Global Engagement, is here as well.
Thank you, Howard. And I do follow up with the USAID website to find those list of partners. It's not a surprise who those partners are. It's NGOs that we work closely with in most of our natural disasters. So you will find a list there, but rattling them off quickly: CARE, Save the Children, Oxfam, UNICEF are all collecting donations. And please, cash donations, not commodity donations, is key. Really love to see a response from the United States communities to these disasters. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Just quickly to add, all of those organizations are working with local Tongan organizations on the ground, including the Tongan Red Cross. You can't work any other way in Tonga or any other country without working with trusted local partners. Thanks.
And with that, I know there are quite a few hands here. We're coming up on the hour. If you would email me the remaining questions, happy to source them out. Thank you all for your time. And of course, as always, we remain committed. And as always, it's a priority of the president and the White House and a full administration effort. So thank you to all the briefers today. Thank you for all attendees, and we'll talk soon. Master Control, please end webinar.